everyone. It's great to see you all here. We had an amazing response to this event, which I think really shows that there is this appetite for a more optimistic conversation around the UK, its tech scene, and what its future could look like. So the idea for this one initially came about when I wrote an article called The Great British Ideas Factory. Should be on our homepage this morning if you want to go and have a look at it. And that was all about renewed enthusiasm for this sort of pro-growth, pro-technology, futuristic visions for the UK. Since we published that piece, I've only seen that conversation growing more and more. And I think we've ended up having this event at a fantastic time with the release of the AI Opportunities Action Plan, published last week. And really just like a lot of talk about growth and embracing technology and innovation. But we know there are some things holding us back as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And there's also what I'm going to be talking about in a new dedicated UK 2.0 newsletter. You'll get some more details about that after this event. So for our first panel, we're going to talk about what the landscape currently looks like for tech, startups in the UK, what policymakers in the tech community can do, maybe how they can work together. And hopefully by the end of it, we'll have put together what we're calling an optimist's case for starting a tech startup in Britain. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Julia Willemyns, who's co-founder of and founding director of UK Day One, Joe Hill, who is policy director at Reform Think Tank, and Barney Hussey-Yeo, who is, of course, founder and CEO of Cleo. So I'm going to ask my panellists to say a little bit more about themselves in a second, but as they do so, I'd love them to answer my first question, which is, what is one reason to be cheerful about the UK? Julia, do you want to start?
Maybe not the weather this morning. I'll maybe start with some background on me. So I'm one of the founding directors of UK Day One. UK Day One was originally set up as an election year campaign to crowdsource policy ideas from the science and tech space and try to get them in the Overton window for the new government. And I guess as a poster child for ambition in the UK, that to some extent turned into something completely different from what I imagined it to be, and it's now become part of this movement that Joe's also part of, and so is Barney, and has turned into what we would consider to be a think tank, and lots more coming up in the next year in terms of our plans going forward. Optimism. I guess the thing that has made me most optimistic is a year ago I said to myself, well, I've got to move to America. And now I'm here and I'm more excited to be building here than I could have been building in America. And yeah, I mean, the fact that I'm still here, I think is an optimist's case. At least
your reason to be cheerful is that you're here.
I now realize how that sounds.
The reason I'm cheerful about Britain is that we have loads and loads and loads of problems, and everyone knows them, and you can see them on the front pages every single day. But there's a secret that I think a few of us know, and more people know, and plenty of us in this room have talked about before, which is that they are fixable. And there are lots of startups founders in this room. There are lots of investors in this room. If you have a secret that no one else knows, that's alpha, right? That's something. That means something. And what it means is that Britain is underpriced at the moment. We have huge problems in this country, but we have the fundamentals right. We're still one of the few countries in the world which net people want to come to rather than leave. We can't forget how important that is. We still are a G7 economy. We still have some of the world's leading universities. We still have London, which is one of the greatest cities in the world. People want to be here and they want to build here. The reason they can't are, I think, institutional. And the secret about institutional problems is that they are very fixable. It's not easy, but it's very worth it if we can do it. And that means that at the moment, people who are leaving London to flood to other countries, often doing it for good reason to found companies there, are competing with people who are currently the best of American talent, the best of Chinese talent, the best of other countries' talents. But if you are staying and building in London, you are staying and building in a market which is kind of underpriced. There's a secret here. We're kind of working it out together. So that's what makes me optimistic. I'm lucky in my job at a think tank to be writing and talking about some of those kind of institutional issues and fixes, which I think we can solve.
Nice. Some of the things. My biggest optimistic case is my fundamental view on the world is all economic progress in the next 40, 50 years is going to come from tech and AI, and it has in the previous 40 years. And if I look at the US, they are so dominant because they can create and scale these massive tech companies, and it's amazing what they've been able to do over the last 30, 40 years. And if I look at the UK now, and if I look at us versus any other city, it is pretty fantastic, the ingredients we have. So we have massive early stage capital. If I'm going to raise anywhere in the world, I would actually raise in London. London has so much capital versus San Francisco is obviously the biggest, but there's no other major city, not New York, Paris, Berlin. We have more early stage capital and talent density in the UK right now than anywhere in the world. So most early stage founders I see actually just go raise in the US, then the arbitrages come back to London. And then because there's such density of talent here, and again, we're the second greatest city in the world outside in the Western world, in terms of density of engineers, of machine learning talent, of AI researchers. This is a fantastic place to start and scale a company. There's very big structural challenges in how you get to public and scaling, et cetera, but the ingredients are here. We have the education system, we have the people, we have the talent, we have the capital, and we could build massive economic success and turn this kind of stagnation and decline to something amazing. If they just let me be Prime Minister. That is the...
Barney, I'd like to stick with you to start with, if that's okay. So obviously you began Cleo here, but you then found this huge audience in the US and you've ended up focusing on the US for the past few years. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and also what differences you found between the US and the UK?
Yeah, so we started the business for the first 3 years in the UK, and this was supposed to be the fintech capital of the world. This was supposed to be the place that you built and scaled, a fintech company. We're, fintech company today, and it kind of turned out to be a bit of a lie. The government got really excited about being this fintech leader. They thought that the FCA should be a big part of that fintech success story. Actually, if you put more government, you put more regulation into a growing part of the economy, you crush that sector. And if you look at the last 5 years, all of the innovation, all of the economic gains, all of the growth has come from other countries. It's come from the US, has dominated. It has come from Nubank. Even Revolut. Revolut is such a great case study of how the UK has kind of missed the boat on capturing and scaling economic value. It's wild that Nick started the business in London, but then the last place he got a banking license was London. He lives in Dubai because he hates the government. He hires people outside of the UK because they've made it so hard for him to build the company here. So we can create these generational companies in London, and I think we do. DeepMind, Revolut, you name it. You can create companies here. The problem is we just do not capture any of the value as the state or the people of the UK from these companies. So, it's this hotbed of talent, it's this hotbed of capital, this hotbed of innovation, but because we don't have the ambition level in government, we don't have the ambition level as a society, we're not going to, Revolut's value is not going to be captured by this British state, it's going to be captured by the US and Dubai and elsewhere, and there's some very simple things you could do to change that, but I just hope Labour and I hope these guys put some good policy papers forward so they listen to us for a second.
Well, that's a great place to go on to my next question, which you set me up especially well for, Barney, because I was going to ask if you were Prime Minister for a day, or perhaps if you just had half an hour with Keir Starmer and you knew you could convince him of one thing. I want to ask all of you what that would be. Maybe, Julia, we could start with you because I know you've worked on so many ideas to put forward to the government on UK Day One. What would the one thing be that you think would have the most impact on UK startups?
Yeah, we've got to rethink how we think about energy, especially with a technological revolution coming up. I think that is the one thing where government isn't really having the right conversation, or really the most honest conversation, both in terms of how demand is going to increase and how it should increase, and we should be really welcoming that increase of demand, and also how tricky the scaling up supply will be. We've done a lot of work on nuclear power and how we think that nuclear is a really good opportunity, both in terms of its ability to scale supply, but also because it's a growing industry, and you want to be supportive of this growing industry in the UK. SMRs are really exciting. Rolls-Royce could be a company that does something really exciting in the next couple of years, or some of the startups that are coming up from the UK are really exciting as well. And we should also be honest about how, beyond nuclear, that takes anywhere between, in the most optimistic case, 3 to 5 years to build. And that's being really optimistic and hoping that we fix all of our regulatory problems, which are quite difficult. In that time period, you're going to have to scale supply as well, and to some extent that means relying on sources that we have historically relied on, and thinking about how we offset in a more creative way. But that's not a conversation that I think is honestly being had.
I mean, I think that conversation did come to the fore a little bit more last week following the AI Opportunities Action Plan. A lot of people really happy with things that were said in that plan. I know you guys were very happy because you felt like your ideas had been somewhat listened to. But then the immediate response was, where are we getting the energy for these data centres? Do you think that things are being thought about in such practical terms at the moment, or are we just talking about unleashing AI and not really where that comes from and how we do it?
Yeah, I think that conversations are being had. I'm not saying that no one's thinking about this. Obviously, people are thinking about this. I think that there's like great ideas out there. So I can talk about maybe 3 that I'm really excited about. So one would be allowing data centers to have private energy generation. The grid is currently in a bit of a state in the UK. Like the queues are really long, getting connectivity is really difficult. It's like quite expensive. So allowing these data centers to have their own private sources of energy would be good, because it would incentivize them to come to the UK and set up here. And also you would build some of that muscle when it comes to building up energy infrastructure. The second one would be to drastically change the role of the ONR, which is the regulatory body that regulates nuclear, and tell them that their job isn't to get risk as low as reasonably possible, but to have the safest view to increasing capacity in the UK. So their job is actually now to get as much nuclear as you can into the UK, and that's something that the Prime Minister could do relatively easily by just having a meeting with them and telling them what their priorities should be. And then the sort of really radical thing that I'm quite excited about, and that we're going to be publishing about in the next couple of weeks, is in the in the medical industry for drugs, you have some sorts of reciprocal agreements where, if I create a drug in the UK, some European countries would automatically consider them safe and allow them to go to market. I think we should be doing something similar when it comes to nuclear power plants, especially giga plants that have been on the market in other countries like South Korea for years. If you could just automatically allow those design reactors to be accepted and then go straight to on-site specifications, that's like 6 months, 12 months off your regulatory pathway, and that makes a huge difference. And you can start getting some regulatory arbitrage where companies are setting up in the UK and having their first reactors in the UK and not in other countries.
So much to think about there. Barney, if we go to you, can you give us your pitch if you were Prime Minister, what you would be doing? But yeah, what's your thoughts on all this? What would be the one thing that you could do?
I'm just thinking about Trump and his 100 executive orders. None of that. I think simply, again, back to my lens of economic growth, and it's going to come from tech startups, and we're on this exponential. And it's just going to get faster with AI, right? So I believe that the massive amounts of economic value will be created by AI startups in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And if I was PM for the day, I would look at like the four major things that you need to do to enable real growth. And maybe I take the lens of Revolut. In terms of capital, so Revolut has managed to raise a huge amount of capital from lots of VCs. Lots of them are UK VCs. The thing people don't realise is all those UK VCs like Boulderton, all of their capital from the LPs comes from the US. It comes from Canada. Like, it's not from our pension funds. We do not benefit in the economic growth of Revolut from like the early private stage. So even though we've got masses of early stage capital in the UK, it is coming from the US. It's coming from Canada. It's coming from Australian pension funds. Like, it's wild how little we invest as a country into growth, and you see that in the returns. So I would get pension funds investing. I would get cash ISAs into growth stocks. I would really push aggressively on that, and it really matters at the growth stage. Like, there's a lot of early stage capital in the US. In the UK, but there's no growth stage capital here. There's no real growth funds. Like Bolton's growth fund's like 650 million. It's tiny, tiny, tiny versus the US. So capital would be my big number one thing in getting that into productive assets. Two is Tony Blair, maybe. Back to education. It's we have to train and teach more AI researchers. Like, we need more machine learning talent for this next generation. We need product managers, designers, engineers. I would go all in from secondary education to universities, really pumping that out, getting as much talent flowing into the UK as possible. Like, I hate Brexit, and it was like the worst thing ever. Like, we need to get people coming to the UK, and we need more talent density. Third is just regulation, and I think you have to massively deregulate, and I think we have to trade off, sadly, income equality in a period of low growth. If you have no economy and no growth, you don't really want a left-wing government that's all about building social safety nets and wealth redistribution. There's no wealth to redistribute. Like, what are you going to do, right? So you actually need to trade off in this short-term period. We need to get the economy growing, and we need to go much more deregulation, much more pro-business, much more pro-growth. And I said there was going to be four things, so I've got to come up with a fourth quickly. I think it's public markets. Like, you would never list a company in the LSE today if you're me. We're a multi-billion-dollar business. We're 200 million ARR. We're profitable, growing very fast. When I'm looking at IPOing, I am not going to go on the LSE today. And that has really big systemic impact to the UK, because if you don't have a functioning stock market where individuals, where pension funds, where others can invest in UK assets, where does the benefit of that Revolut, of that DeepMind go? It goes to the US. You're either going to get acquired by Google and it's going to go to that US parent company and then US owners, or you're going to list as a UK company on the NASDAQ, and that means all that economic growth from maybe a $5 billion company when you go out, $5 billion to $1 trillion, and then all those people you hire in between, all those taxes you pay, that goes to a different state. So I think over the next 10 years, without massive reform, we're going to create some huge generational companies here. We're going to create the next DeepMind, maybe like 3 more of those companies, because we have the researchers, we have the capital, blah, blah, blah. It's just none of this benefit will go to the UK. So they're my 4 things I would drastically change on day one, and then...
Yeah, just to pick up on that last one, obviously we're talking about the reason to start a company in the UK, but it feels like, the other major problem is actually it's fine to go ahead and start a company, but we're not keeping them. Would you say that that's actually a bigger problem than encouraging people to have that ambition and entrepreneurial spirit that you were talking about earlier, or is it both?
Yeah, no, we create lots of companies. We have more venture capital than other major cities. Like, we're dominating Europe in venture capital, startup creation, blah blah blah. But we sell out a lot to as a founder. If Google gives me a $1 billion, $2 billion offer to sell out in 4 years, like, I'm going to make 200 million, and that's it's a nice place to be as a founder. And it's not great for the state though. For the state, you want that company to have ambition, to keep going, to have the capital, to be able to have the runway to go into $1 trillion company. And today, what you're going to see is most of these companies will sell out early, and the founders will have a great life. Like, I'm doing fine, guys. It's going to be okay, but it won't help the state. And then, the vast majority of people we hire has to now be outside of the UK, because there's just not enough talent. As we've scaled to 400 or 500 people, like, we're having to look at other countries. And even from a tax position, like, the earlier capital gains rise on founders was just like, it's like, we have an Austin office now because I'm a rational actor, and it's lower capital gains in Austin, America, than it is in the UK. And again, I'm very patriotic, but most of this capital and this growth is going to go to different countries. I know this is supposed to be an optimism panel.
It's look, you say you're patriotic, and isn't there that definition of patriotism that's if you love your country, then you'll tell it what it's doing wrong and try to make it better?
I think we're seeing loads of this, though, right? Like, if I look at all of my founder friends and CEOs, every single one of them is engaged with UK politics because they know how bad it's going. Well, you guys are engaged with the status quo because it's bad. And I think if we were in if we were in the 90s, like everything was kind of chill. We had Clinton and Blair, and I was probably like 10 at the time, so I can't talk too much to it. But it was a much calmer world. We had economic growth, things were looking good, and fast forward 20, 30 years, and it's a time when we all have to be engaged. It's a time when we all have to input, and I think the government gets it. It's like, do they have the political will and the capabilities to actually action it is the real big question now.
I do want to talk a bit more about that, getting the tech sector involved in politics policy. But first of all, let's just see what Joe, if there's anything left on the list of things that you could do.
I don't know. These guys have got really productive first days. I mean, I think once they're done with all of that, there's not much left for me. I'm going to get less done, but I'm going to say maybe two things to fill that. I think the kind of the thing we've not talked about, which is sort of obviously on the list, is housing, and is particularly the availability of housing in London. I think that one of the biggest mistakes that the current government is making is its plan to kind of rebalance house building away from the capital to the regions. And, to some extent, does it matter given the last government had a plan which was a bit more London intensive but wasn't doing it? It's not much between them. But I think where you build housing, where you build office space, where you build lab space, where you build infrastructure does matter. And I talked about London before. We are lucky to have still a world capital city that people want to come in, live in, people want to do business in. The agglomeration effects of letting more people live there cheaply, or live there at all in many cases, are massive, and the economic literature kind of bears anyone out on that. There are lots of policy levers the government could pull to do that, and they're kind of well documented, so I won't list them. But I think the main thing I'd kind of say, which I think is maybe underrated in this debate, is when you want people to go and found a startup, you want them to quit their jobs or quit education or quit whatever kind of mainstream path they're doing. That comes with a lot of risk, and if your rent is some of the highest rent in the Western world, or you've got a mortgage and your payments are kind of going through the roof, and so you're stuck on your kind of professional salary ladder, you're just not going to do that, right? And so if we can't in the short term start kind of suddenly valuing startups in this country much more, raising much more money and paying people way more, the least we can do is just like expose people to less cost when they're trying to do that, when they're trying to hire people. So I think housing's an obvious one. Maybe a less obvious one, which if I'm done with that in the morning, early afternoon, which I'd want to get to, and maybe we'll talk about a bit more, is Barney's already talked about regulation and sort of opening up markets in Britain to kind of more disruption. I'd also actually just talk about opening the state up to much more disruption. In this country, unlike in quite a lot of other countries, we have a very large state which does huge functions that in other countries is uncommon for the state to do, principally healthcare. That's 12% of GDP. Like, I don't know if anyone in the room has tried to sell software as a service into the NHS, but it's basically impossible. One of the biggest growth verticals in the US at the moment is defense tech and other kinds of deep tech. Our defense sector is much smaller than the US's for obvious reasons, but the one that we have is still 2% of GDP. Does it buy from startups? Not really. And certainly does it help startups who want to scale to the stages that Barney's talking about? Not at all. So I would really try and liberalise the bits of the state that buy things from the private sector and let them buy things from startups and growth stage companies.
That's a great place to go on to my next question, which is kind of trying to flip things around. I want to talk about why do we want to do this? What benefits are there for the country? Ask not what your country can do for tech, but what can tech do for your country? And you've done quite a lot of work on this, Joe. There's a lot that having an innovative approach to government and to the civil service, all these public services could do. And do you think that it would be helpful to nurture that talent here in the UK and then for the government to back it early by getting contracts with them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Barney was talking about patriotism earlier, and it's a word we don't play with much in this country for reasons which I'm not entirely clear about, but we should. And there's a lot that tech can do for the state, and tech may not want to do much for the state, but I'd like it to. So I'm going to give it a go. There are maybe some obvious ones, which are we need to grow our economy to, improve people's quality of life, and the biggest growth sectors Barney's talked about lots over the last few years has been what we now kind of broadly call as tech, or was originally software and hardware and now a bunch of other things. The first and most useful thing that tech can do for the state is just kind of be here, help us grow the economy, help us get those tax revenues, really high quality jobs, better jobs as we lose jobs to automation. Those are all kind of obvious given ones. Maybe two things which are slightly less obvious. I think it can actually just help us improve the state. I mean, Britain is kind of capable of both building DeepMind and also having public services, many of which rely on mainframe computers from the 1970s still to run, which NHS services which rely on you timing your call with about 30 seconds either side of when the GP surgery opens so that you can try and get slightly higher in the queue to maybe get an appointment that day. The Ministry of Defence is going to take over a decade to replace the shells that we've already given to Ukraine. We're planning to give them a lot more. That doesn't seem sustainable to me based on any reasonable forecast of how long we'll be there. And so there are lots of ways that tech can actually help us rebuild the state. And I think those are hugely underpriced, and we just don't let it at the moment. We have a state which is hugely averse to buying from anyone where they perceive a bit of risk, and that in itself is a false economy because it creates a huge amount of risk. I've just talked about loads of state failures which are caused by big old incumbent suppliers who don't actually want to improve their profit model. They just want to try and kind of hive off the costs. The final thing, and maybe this is kind of getting onto politics a bit, but is I think this tech can just model a better culture and way of working for the state. If I look at the economy and the world and where kind of current and future elites in Britain come from, the bit of the economy I'm most excited about, the bit where I think there's just the most dynamism, is the tech sector. I think that that's the part of our economy and the part of the global economy where you're seeing people who have built things which work really well, with very, very little of that in any part of the state. And so, role modeling a different way and just getting involved in the state is perhaps the most important thing, actually, that tech can do for the state, because we're kind of lacking leaders at the moment, and that's the only place I can see kind of new leaders coming forward.
If anyone wants to read a bit more about that, Joe wrote a piece for us called Scaling the State, which is also, I think, on the homepage today. So you can get a bit more in the details there. Let's go on. Let's talk about politics. Barney, I did want to ask you in particular, because you have been getting involved in this conversation recently. You went to, was it the House of Lords that you spoke at? Yeah. What motivated you to do that? Because there's so many people who would rather just not get involved, and also who would maybe just say, well, the government should learn how to fix the tech sector or how to produce growth. Like, it's their job, it's not mine. But is it a helpful attitude that technologists need to start understanding how to talk to policymakers and trying to get them to understand what they need?
Yeah, it's hard not to do this in a negative. In the optimistic lens of the world, we have so many good things to turn this country around, talent, capital, blah, blah, blah. I actually don't believe it's free markets and the government getting out of the way. In a time of crisis, which we're in now, you need government intervention. You need the state to be really proactive and actually driving a lot of change to allow the tech sector to really grow. So, if I was, again, Prime Minister for the day, I want to do things like create the Manhattan Project for AI and spend 20, 30 billion and just go crazy on it. The problem is you see it in the markets, right? As soon as Labour did the budget, you saw sterling went down, you saw our borrowing costs went up, and we're in this really weird spot as a country where you can't just spend your way out of it and then, go give more capital to AI, go do all these things. Actually, you look at the opportunities plan, it's so meek. It's like the amount of capital going into that is tiny. It's like 1-2 billion. Master's son just put 500 billion, I don't know if it's true, but into the US. So we're broke as a country. And if you're broke and you need to make some changes, you're going to have to get a way more productive government. You can't just do austerity and go, hey, we're going to cut our way out of this and then spend loads on AI, because that's not going to work. So you need to go into government and say, hey, how do we make this 10x more productive? Yes, we're going to have to see massive headcount reduction, but we're going to have to automate, we're going to have to bring AI in, we're going to have to bring software in, and the state is going to have to get a huge amount more productive so you can actually go spend on things that are going to make a real difference, whether it's nuclear, whether it's getting housing going, whether it's investing in growth capital, whatever it is. So this is not going to actually improve unless we can get out of this broke cycle. We need to be able to actually make the government more productive, and I think tech can do a huge job there. We've been working recently with them, giving them a team from Cleo, fully formed. Hey, give us a big problem, we'll go solve it for you. And just going through the litany of stupid shit the government is doing it's truly fascinating. There's ripe opportunities to make the state way more productive, just put it that way. And they haven't got a clue how to do it, especially with tech. So the reason I think it's important people like me and others go into the state is this is the new economy. This is the new way of the world. We can build things. They can't. And I think people that are builders, like all of you guys, need to engage meaningfully with the state and be able to change it and make it more productive. And if we don't, it's another 10, 20 years of stagnation. And I'm going to LA, guys. I'm not going to stay here.
Julia, I think maybe you can add some helpful tips there for you work with people in the technology and science sectors to help them understand how to put forward their ideas as sort of oven-ready policy proposals. I mean, what's been your experience with that in terms of the main things that you need to help them do, and what you would advise people to think about if they're trying to express their ideas, not in a way that is talking to other people in the tech community, but talking to people in government and the policy world?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is, much like you can just do things if you're an entrepreneur working in the commercial space, you can just do things if you're an entrepreneur and working in public interest. There's tons of examples of people sort of posting their way into policy, and it's actually incredible how easily things can get done in the UK compared to other countries. So that's a point of optimism. Relatively, our state is quite flexible and able to get things done. You just have to convince them that it's the right way to go. The thing that's I guess relatively special about how we have worked in the past is we've worked with policy entrepreneurs, that's what we call them, and tried to make their ideas implementation ready. So that's sort of a two-step process. Firstly, it's about thinking about what policy levers actually exist. If you go into the detail, who would need to do what, who are you speaking to, who do you need to send your memo to? Often people who aren't in Westminster are not thinking and breathing this space. They don't know that, and that's fine. That's also about working with people who have that context to make sure that you're speaking to the right people in the right tone. I also think you have to speak in their language. You have to understand what the political constraints are. And I kind of think, I always talk about how whenever you're putting forward any policy, there are thousands of ways to tell the story about why that policy should be put in place. And you need to think about, how do you tell the story in a way that is most salient to your audience? And sometimes that's, making arguments that aren't necessarily the arguments that are most salient to you. And I think often people who aren't in Westminster day in, day out, they don't really think about the political constraints that those people are operating within. That's
a really important point, that we gotta start thinking it like other people do, and that goes for politicians as well. Do we feel like politicians understand tech at the moment? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can have a go, but because I think there's sort of they don't. and there are good sides to that and bad sides to that. And I had for this sort of a encouragement and a warning on politicians and tech. The encouragement is, and I agree with Julia, this stuff is hard. It's not that hard. I spent 7 years in the civil service. I'm a fully paid up member of the blob. Politics is an area of domain expertise. Sort of, it exists, but it doesn't. It's not that thick. It's very, very wide and very, very shallow. And so it's not impossible, as Julia said, to get cut through with really good ideas, really good movements, really good campaigns, and make a real difference. And I think actually, the more people are waking up to that, the more we're going to see people being able to kind of leverage the state to good or bad outcomes, just because it doesn't have the capability to kind of navigate this world very well. So that's the kind of positive case. Maybe the warning on politicians and tech is tech may not be interested in politics, but politics is really interested in tech. We can see it in the last few days, right? We've had the trial of the Southport murderer, and the thing that politicians are talking about on the news is that he could buy a knife from Amazon, rather than the fact that he was reported to the police 10 times, no one did anything. We are looking at a huge state failure, and we're saying, oh, that's something to do with tech. We can't live in a world where the year becomes kind of 2050 and we're all still eating soup because our government knife license hasn't come through. So there's just a kind of, obviously there are difficult questions there about what should be available on the internet and how, but where should the focus be? It absolutely shouldn't be on Jeff Bezos. It should be on why the police didn't do their jobs. And I think that tells you something about Westminster's interest in making tech the boogeyman very quickly.
Just coming in really quickly, I do think that they want to understand, though. There's a lot of appetite from politicians to hear from the sector, and I think whoever's able to explain tech in a way that's really digestible, very clear to a person who's not a domain expert, is going to have a lot of a good ability to speak to these people, because I do think that there is appetite. I also would say that in the civil service, in DSIT, for example, there's fantastic talent. I'm always blown away when I meet some of these civil servants, and hear how ambitious they are, and hear how in the weeds they are. I think AC was a huge success. So I don't want to be too down on Westminster when it comes to their technical abilities. There's tons of superstars in there.
I mean, as you mentioned, there is a bit of a meme that is just move to the Bay Area, bro. Just go build that. It's just move to California or move to Austin, whatever you want. But you got to be where the builders are. And I have to say, I find that a little bit annoying. Not saying that it's not necessarily sometimes the right choice for people, but I think it's the idea that everyone can just up and leave the place where their family is, where their kids are in school, where they've built their life, built their business, and that they should just do it for the sake of so that they can access particular VCs or whatever it might be. And I think London is a particular case of that, because we don't just have British founders here, we have founders from all over the world, a lot of them from Europe, and they don't want to move away from their family in Romania, Greece, France. They want to be here because this is a fantastic place where you can build a company, but you can still have access to all the rest of Europe as well. And I just wondered, I guess maybe this is one for Joe, because in your spare time you also run the Greater London Project, which is really fun, series of get-togethers and talks all about why London is amazing, but also some ways we could make it better. What's been your sense from running that of why people are invested in let's make London somewhere that people can stay and that they can live, and it's not just about building businesses, is it? It's about lifestyle as well.
Yeah, I think London gets a bad rap because British culture, which I love passionately, and it's my home culture, loves to be pretty downbeat on things. And of the hierarchy of things we don't like, we put London right at the bottom for reasons which make no sense to me whatsoever. I think it's downstream of lots of stuff about the relative success of London compared to the rest of the country, and how expensive it is and how crap the tube is and everything else. So, you know, I'm not here to pass it. But we launched a Substack in the project, you know, almost 9 months ago now, and I've been amazed at the kind of level of interest and investment by people from all kinds of different backgrounds across London in how we make it kind of the most vital city in the world. It's kind of a subset of the patriotism point, right? It's just, I think that pride in where you live it's just so vital to recognizing its flaws and doing something about them. And any hope that we have of trying to kind of fix Britain's problems starts with fixing London's problems. And I think there's a huge cohort of people who want to make a difference about that. I'm certainly very glad because, you know, there's no way my wife's going to let me leave London for America anyway. So the way I think about it, this is, well, look, we're staying, so let's, you know, stay and fight for what we want. It fills me with, you know, confidence and passion every day that so many people feel the same.
But Barney, for someone like you, you've obviously now got responsibility to hundreds of people to get the business to the best place it can be. So is there now this choice of am I going to stay here and try and wrangle with the government, or am I going to just go where I know I'm wanted and where I know that there's the support?
Well, yeah, I think founders are very rational actors in the grander scheme. Like, lots of them are patriots, lots of them do care about their country and want to make it a great place, but they are very rational actors. So, you know, the UK does have advantages, though, over California. If I go to California, it's 38% capital gains versus 24% in London. That's like a massive difference. And the same in New York. So, you know, founders do think about that and think about where they're going to be personally. Two, like, the talent is 3 times more expensive. Lene is one of our staff, and she's from America, and she's come to the UK on a UK salary. She will tell you how much different.
I negotiated well, Barney.
There's a big difference between a San Francisco employee and a London employee, and, you know, Cambridge is as good as Stanford, right? So, like, if you can get someone 3 times cheaper, I think it's a good thing to do. And it's why we have a good talent base over here. And, you know, fundamentally, Labour is right. Like, it all comes down to growth. If you don't have an economy that's growing, you don't have wealth, you're not going to have wealth redistribution or anything. So I am all in the pro-growth camp. It's just like, can we actually come up with a plan to do that? Saying we're going to have growth is great. It's like me saying I'm going to be $1 trillion company. Like, there's got to be a little bit more substance behind me saying I'm going to be $1 trillion company to actually get there. And I think that's just a little bit of what we're missing today in, you know, London and the UK. It's like, what is that plan to get back to growth? And I want to hear about that plan. I want to help on that plan. And that's the thing we really need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, does it kind of come down to, like, people should just be able to choose where they most want to be? It's the idea that maybe you're just left without a choice if we don't get that growth back.
Well, the thing for, I'm not obscenely rich, but if you're if you're wealthy, you can go anywhere in the world. You can go to Dubai, you can go to San Francisco. It's like everyone else that doesn't get the choice. It's all my friends in Sheffield. They're not going to move to the Bay Area tomorrow on their, you know, O1 visa and be, like, invited to the White House, right? It's, you know, millionaires, multimillionaires, they get the choice where they're going to live. And that's why I've seen this huge exodus of millionaires in the UK for other countries. And we just have to create the environment that people want to be here. And it's very antithetical to a Labour government. Like, it's they're going to have to go really hard on, like, you know, you're going to have to take short-term tax hits. You're going to have to take short-term income inequality hits. You're going to have to take short-term deregulation and consumer protection hits. You're going to have to create an environment that's actually quite right-wing and quite pro-growth to actually get this economy going, which is so different to Labour's kind of core ideology. And I think that's the biggest thing we're gonna struggle with. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there. Did that answer the question?
What have we found in terms of the case for the Optimist Guide to building a startup in Britain? I think we've mentioned the possibility of change in government and in policy, and how you guys are all pretty positive that could happen. We've mentioned talent. We haven't maybe talked about that much, but I think that might come up in our next panel as well. We've mentioned, like, the cultural capital of London and what a great place it is to be. if we were to kind of embrace innovation and affect some of these changes, get growth going, and kind of become a bit of a pro-technology nation, what do you all think it could look like in 10 years? What would the optimist case be for you start a startup now and you'll be part of this amazing tech scene in 10 years? Or what do you think it will look like? You're all looking very thoughtful. And
I'll do a quick one. My most bullish case, and these companies take 10, 15 years to build, by the way, so it is going to take a while to get there. But in the next 5 years, I hope there is 5 more deep mines created in the UK, and the government helps support that. We've got the capital, we've got the talent, we've got the people, we've got the ambition, and we've got the talent density now of companies have built big things here, and you've got that second generation, third generation of employees and founders to kind of recycle. So everything we're English speaking, we're close to America, we're close to Europe. We have really cheap, amazing talent, and now is a better time than any as a UK founder to go raise capital, because you can go raise a ton of money in the US. You can then come back to London, hire 10 times more people than you could in the US, and it's a great place to build and scale. I just hope we get more founders like that, and we create the conditions they want to stay and scale the businesses. And that could be really transformative in an era where you're going to see such rapid economic growth with AI. It's going to change everything. It is going to change the startup creation rates. Companies will get to $1 billion in revenue far faster than they ever did. And it's going to be wild how big these companies are. They're going to be $5-10 trillion companies. And that really fundamentally changes any country in the world. And we have everything to build those companies. So, yeah, let's do it.
great. Julia, do you have any thoughts? What in 10 years, what's the optimist case? UK day one will obviously be 10 times the size it is now and still fighting the good fight.
I don't know if you always want to scale. Unlike startups, I don't know if these sorts of operations always want to scale. But I find it really difficult to predict the future and to also say what the optimist case for the future would be. And maybe this is me being a little bit difficult and not wanting to answer the question correctly. But I think that there's so many things that could go right, and that's what we should be aiming for when we think about where the UK could go. I don't know what that world looks like. We thought we'd have flying cars by now, and I'm like, okay, I'm kind of okay that we don't. Maybe we should, but I'm pretty happy we have all these other things. But I think in terms of the spirit of the country, I hope we're more ambitious, and I hope that we feel more empowered, and I think. Yeah, and I also hope that we end up having a culture of sort of helping each other see the vision of what could be or what we could build. I think that's been incredibly transformational for me as a relatively young person who built something relatively young when I was when I am was whatever, it's all relative. Having someone who I had 2 mentors, both of which said to me, what's a 10x vision of what you're building? And I'm relatively ambitious, but having someone push me even further and say, well, you could be bigger or you could have more. That's a thing that's pretty rare. One of those mentors is American and was importing that vision, and the other one was relatively American in spirit. And I would like that to be considered a really British thing to do.
I totally agree with all of that. I think that sense of ambition and sense of dynamism has got to be core. I think maybe this is a good kind of shelling point for it. I think in 10 years, when, some younger versions of the three of us are sat here talking about the next 10 years of British growth, I think we'd like there to be less uncertainty, because the room would be full of even more people who aren't just trying to predict the future, they're trying to build the future. I really powerfully believe that. And I think that cultural shift might look like there are 3 things I just, at a dinner table somewhere, I'd like to be a little bit different. I'd like it to be more common when you say, how are you? I quit my job to found a company, for people to be like, oh, that's amazing. What can I do to help? Rather than be like, oh my God, what are you going to do with your mortgage? So I'd like that to be different. I think it can be. The second is I'd like people who sat around a table at some sort of VC dinner thing and talking about growing their company to the next stage, to be actually saying, you know what, their capital was a problem, but also I'm finding I can get more and more customers here. You know, more and more big legacy British businesses, they want to do business with us. As startups or more bits of the government, they want to contract with us, and you know, we can build our footprint and grow that way in Britain because the economy is just being more dynamic. And the final one, which is a niche one, but like I think it's underrated. I'd like it when really ambitious, bright young people who want to be founders, who have, you know, great CVs, think, what company can I build? They don't think, I'm just going to, go and do some kind of commercial venture. They actually think, a bit like Barney was talking about with his team, you know what, I'm going to go build something in government. I'm going to go and build something where I'm going to sell into the States or sell into the NHS. And that's not going to be easy, but it's going to be really worth it. And it's going to be worth it to me financially if I can crack it as well, by the way. Those would be the three things.
Mm-hmm. And maybe if I can add one more thing to the optimist's case, I like what you were saying, Julia, about like, it doesn't have to be that we become American. It can be that we have our own unique British version of ambition. And it's not like we don't have a blueprint or history of that. Like, we built the Clifton Suspension Bridge. We half built the Eurotunnel, you know. There is a history of British innovation and growth and ambition, and we can definitely have that again. So let's go to questions.
Thanks very much. Tim Flagg from UKAI. Great panel session, thank you. I wanted to get your thoughts on what's the best way to bring the general public with us, because we're sort of sitting here right in the centre of the London tech bubble, but right across the UK, there's quite a lot of anxiety, there's quite a lot of sort of anxiousness generally about AI and about why it's relevant to people's lives. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what do we need to do to bring them along with us, because ultimately they're our customers for all tech.
Barney, you make a product that brings AI into people's lives, so maybe you want to have a think about that one?
I think that's an incredibly hard question. It's always selling the benefits of what it's going to do, and it's not about job replacement, it's why you can be more productive. There's lots of like the language of what we talk about, but I do think we need to lay out in like layman's terms to the British public, like what is the diagnosis of the state, what is the diagnosis of our problems, and here are 3 big things that we're going to do to fix it, and what does that mean for you in the future? And I don't see that clearly articulated from the government. I would just love, you need the same message again and again and again articulated. And I think we could do a much better job at having, those 3 pillars, what it's going to do for society, what we need to achieve by when, and just being super boring about just repeating the same message again and again to consumers who are the population. I think if you could do that, people could see what the benefits are versus like Farage's populist rhetoric and like why that's false. I think we could do a big job of turning around the sentiment in the UK. But yeah, it's a big question. That's a hard one.
Maybe to just foment a bit of discussion and sort of disagreement on the panel, because Barney knows far more about this sort of thing than me, and I think he's right. But I think there are a couple of sort of memes that creep into this which aren't very helpful. I think that it's really common, particularly for policymakers, to look at any polling on British attitudes to AI and to think, well, I've got to wait until the public, give me permission and then we'll do something differently. And I think that, for what it's worth, the same thing sometimes applies to people in the tech sector and founders as well. And I just don't think that's how the public works. Like, people have got to build this stuff and it's got to go really, really well, and then they'll believe they can use it and adopt it and things like that. But the waiting game is a losing game in this, and we're all just sort of waiting for the public to kind of put a deal on the table for the sector and for government to say, oh, we'll be cool if you do this. That's not the way the public work. The public reward you if you do an amazing job and build something really cool, and they punish you if you mess it up. And that's the way it's always going to be. So I think they will believe it when they see it, or they won't, but waiting around isn't going to work either way. And look, maybe it's not, in some bits of society, maybe it's not going to be something people love. Like, people hate people who give out parking fines, right? But that's part and parcel of life. And I think for some of the applications of AI, particularly in the States, people are going to be a bit uncomfortable with it, but in net, it's what they want.
I think people are going to be scared because it is scary. Like to be like it is like the future in some ways is scary. But the way that I have tried to communicate with people is by reminding them that we're not going to be able to stop it. Like it's going to happen anyway. The future is coming, and AI is coming, and all that we can do is slow it down in the UK. And then what does that mean? That means that the dividends don't come here. The prosperity doesn't come back to the country. And then even if you have like a wide scale, white collar deindustrialization, which I think is very plausible, if you don't then have the capital coming back into the UK to take care of the people in this country, then you're going to be left off in a worse situation. Or if your businesses don't do tech adoption or diffusion properly because that's being stopped through regulation or through other kinds of freezing methods, your businesses aren't going to be internationally competitive. And then you're not going to be able to export your goods. So, I mean, to some extent, I think the fear is not going to go away, and maybe we can harness the fear into letting people realize that they should be scared, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be optimistic about, or at least happy to embrace AI in the UK.
Hi, thanks so much for the panel. I really enjoyed it. You guys clearly outlined that there's a lot of potential in the UK for economic growth and for growth going forward. And we've talked a lot about the government, but what can the individual do on the day-to-day? What can we in this room do to play our part and to push that economic growth and to make sure that it happens?
I mean, this is really controversial, but Tyler Cowen came out with this one blog post. Actually, no, I think it was in Bloomberg, and he just said, "Work 10 times harder. If you're ambitious, just work harder."
Barney, anything to add to that one?
The most ambitious people in society shouldn't do zero-sum jobs. So don't go to private equity, don't be a lawyer, don't go be McKinsey, probably all those kind of things in this room. Everything you guys... No, sorry, I'm just bashing you guys now. But there's a lot of zero-sum jobs that people do in the UK where they think it's the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to make the most money in a quick, sustainable way. But if we're going to change society, we need less people in zero-sum career paths. So, go into the public sector, build a startup, do something that's actually productive in society. Don't be a McKinsey consultant.
Hello, Damien Horton from Eloy. Picking up on Joe's comment earlier about governments not buying from startups. I think it's a real chronic problem. You see it in health, defence, military, education, etc. And the civil service is quite good at identifying some of the problems, but they actually can't tend to then buy from startup. They normally go on these industry consultations. You get a delivery partner, a consultancy, and IT outsourcing, listing off all these acronyms: GDS, CDO, critical infrastructure, spending controls, subsidy controls, value for money. And it's an immense barrier. And it's quite hard for the civil servants to write a business case to ever say, right, let's just spend £1 million on a startup. It then upscales and it's £10 million with this consultancy. So, I mean, how do you unpick this web? Or is it about fast-track channels, or is it something else? How would you actually get around to, understanding and solving that problem?
There are a bunch of very technical, specific things, many of which you've listed, which I would change, and we've written about, and you can read a lot about on our website, so I won't list now. But I think the overall framing and the way that I think we need to shift discussions of this in government, but kind of in society as well, is around risk. A lot of this comes back to risk and perceptions of risk which just don't make sense in the real world, but look great in the government's green book, right? The way I think about it is this: we perceive a huge amount of risk in contracting with a startup, contracting with an unfamiliar supplier even, or someone who's just not on the right procurement framework. And, will they deliver the thing? Will it work well in 10 years? Will people blame us because it messed up and there was a big scandal, all of that? But it's not risk relative to a perfect status quo. It's actually risk relative to a really failing status quo, right? Public service in this country are doing really very badly and have been on, at best, flat and at worst, a steep decline in every area aside from education in the last 15 years. And so what kind of risk are you worried about, right? Are you worried about the risk of doing something and maybe it going a bit wrong, or doing nothing and over time everything just continuing to go badly? I am not convinced that those two should be treated differently, but they are every single day in government procurement decisions, government partnership decisions. They shouldn't be.
I think we'll have to wrap up there so that we can have a break. But if you have any more questions for our panellists, you can come and grab them. So I just want to say thank you so much to Julia, Joe and Barney. Please join me in thanking them for being here today.